Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Hydrogen Seminar Series organized by the Clean Combustion Research Center at KAUST. My name is Mohammed Al-Juaid, and I am a courtesy professor of mechanical engineering at CCRC. Interest in hydrogen in a globally sustainable energy system has recently gained significant momentum in major advanced economies. Many consider the next decade to be the hydrogen decade. Challenges, however, for widespread deployment of hydrogen remain. Costs, technologies, and infrastructure scaling up are critical barriers. With the right policies in place and targeted enablers to drive the rapid deployment of associated technologies, hydrogen could become the key enabler with unparalleled impacts in the emerging energy landscape. Hydrogen would play a critical role in the fundamental shift to a circular carbon economy. Hydrogen is a versatile, safe, and sustainable energy carrier that can be made from various primary energy sources. In addition to its traditional use as a chemical feedstock, hydrogen can be deployed in energy sectors that are considered difficult to decarbonize, such as transportation, cement and steel industry, heat and power. Every 2 weeks, we will examine a different topic: hydrogen production, transportation, storage, distribution, safety, use, and commercial opportunities. We will look into the whole value chain. We will also explore the policy levers which are necessary to accelerate the deployment of hydrogen. The seminars will be conducted in a hybrid panel format, and all plenaries will feature 3 speakers. All seminar sessions will last for 1.5 hours. And as I said, they are hybrid, live and virtual, and they are multidisciplinary and open to public, open to all. The free to attend seminar series will bring leading experts in hydrogen from government, industry, academia, national labs to provide critical insights into the technology, economic, policy, and market. The schedule of seminar sessions are available in our website, and the other information about the speakers is also in the website. Links to the seminars will be emailed ahead of time and will be made available in our website. I would like to take this opportunity really to thank the CCR communication admin team, the CCR communications and admin teams, as well as the KAUST IT for their hard work and support in these seminars. So as you all know, that energy transition is happening at varying speeds around the world, and local priorities and conditions often influence its pace, and the Middle East is no exception. And today's seminar is going to focus on the future role of hydrogen in the Middle East. And now I will yield the floor to my colleague, Professor Bassam Dali, the moderator of this session. And final note that I hope the discussion at this seminar and the future and the next seminars will inspire you by what others are doing, learn about the hydrogen, and interact with influential people from across the world. So Bassam, please.
Good afternoon, all. Indeed, Dr. Mohammed deserves an applause for all his hard work in putting this seminar series together. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome all. It is so good to see so many of you in here and those online to this inaugural CCRC Hydrogen Seminar here at KAUST. I've been interested in hydrogen in one form or another for many years, and I'm excited to witness the enthusiasm for this energy vector as one of the many strategies to decarbonize our economy and the energy sector in particular. Today's seminar is focused on future hydrogen in the Middle East. As you see, this region has been supplying the world for energy resources, of course, mostly oil and gas, for decades. But as you all may know, it's also endowed with excellent renewable energy resources, such as solar, wind, and geothermal, to be able to do more than just oil and gas. In this seminar, we will explore the role of the Middle East to supply and indeed to use hydrogen as the new energy vector, either being it from fossil-based fuels or from splitting water using renewable electricity. We will have 3 speakers today. Each will speak for around 20 minutes, and then we will have a panel discussion for around 30 minutes. Please use the Q&A function to register your question, and you will endeavor to attend to it during the panel discussion part. Those who are attending in person in here can ask questions in person directly. The CVs of all our speakers in detail are, and bios actually, is now the webpage of the lecture. So what I'll do, I'll briefly introduce one as I ask him to speak. The first of our speaker is Dr. Manal Shehabi, who's an academic visitor at St. Antony's College, Oxford University, and is a founding director of SHE Research and Advisory. She's also a research associate of the Economics Research Forum. An applied economist, she has expertise in energy, sustainability, and economic policy design in hydrocarbon economies. She has served as an expert with the UNFCCC, contributing author to the 2019 IPCC report, a lead author on policy briefs to T7 Germany, which is the G7 summit, and the T20 Italy, which is the G20 summits, among many other contributions to the energy field. So, Manal, please start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bassam, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you. It is my absolute pleasure to be with you here this morning, well, my morning. And I, as the first speaker, I would like to follow up on what we heard from Dr. Mohammed and Dr. Bassam, but also take a little bit more of an overarching discussion of the hydrogen economy or opportunity in the Middle East and North Africa, particularly in the Gulf states, but also with a focus on really opportunities and challenges in a more generic term. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen at the moment. Okay, so then let me just start the presentation. So many thanks again also, Dr. Bassam, for that kind introduction. So we'll just get to it really. In terms of what I'll be presenting today, it's really, I also have been working on hydrogen as part of the larger energy transition and economic sustainability story of countries in the Middle East with a focus on oil producing economies in the Gulf region. And what I'll be presenting today is really a compilation of different studies over time. And I've had the pleasure of working with a wonderful colleagues as well, and I also had helped on hydrogen strategy with different investors who are looking to go into green hydrogen, particularly in the Middle East, more in a geopolitical perspective. And I was, when I was formerly at the Institute for Energy, Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, I was also one of the Institute's reviewers of the white paper for hydrogen strategy in Kuwait as well. So all of this will be kind of summarized, if you will, in what I'll be presenting and sharing with you today. I don't want to spend a lot of time introducing this, but this is, since I'm the very first speaker, I'll just go ahead very briefly to kind of contextualize the discussion on why the hydrogen opportunity has been important and why we've seen a lot of expansion in hydrogen projects, national strategies globally, really. But a big part of that, of course, is that hydrogen can be sourced from different, whether it's fossil fuels, or we can apply fossil fuels and take part of the carbon out through CCUS or carbon capture and sequestration and utilization, then that becomes more of a clean hydrogen, what is often referred to as blue, or even, as Dr. Bassam mentioned, from electrolyzing water and separating hydrogen from oxygen from green, what is called green hydrogen. And the value of the carbon in the process varies, but hydrogen itself, when it's used, there's really no carbon in the product of it. And also, as Dr. Mohammed mentioned, it's got amazing opportunities which have really made it really well positioned, the potential solution, so to speak, for the energy transition and decarbonization solutions, both for local consumption, transport, cooling, heating, electricity, or even as a storage, not just a feedstock, but also huge export opportunity in the market. And there's many countries at the moment, I think over 25, that have established hydrogen strategies, many of them, of course, in the region, of course, where you guys are sitting at KAUST, Saudi Arabia is the biggest energy market in the region, and of course has been also a leader in the front. But the advantages of that, as I mentioned very briefly, not only that it has versatility across industries and across the different energy supply chain, but more importantly, that it's low carbon. So if it's from the fossil fuels with carbon capture with CCUS or CCS technology, or from green, it's what we are considering as quote unquote clean hydrogen, and therefore important in the world's efforts to achieve minimize climate change and achieve net carbon neutrality by mid-century. If we look at hydrogen in general, of course, it still has many technical challenges, including high costs of producing it, the high flammability of it, and other safety considerations, storage and transportation challenges, also the need to develop also efficient technologies as well. So this is more on the hydrogen view itself. What I want to focus on, well, let me go over this very briefly. Also, the type of hydrogen that will be produced has different cost drivers and different cost structures. So for green, for example, the opportunity will be where there's really advantageous renewable energy costs, but also electrolyzers costs on the electricity side. And then for blue, of course, or the low carbon, it's really the importance of carbon or technology in the CCUS or the carbon capture and utilization and storage technology that will be really important. But significant technological improvements are going to be driving the hydrogen market going forward. And in the region, we've seen huge interest in this, but particularly with the announcement of net zero pledges were announced last year, the UAE in 2050, 2035, but really then Saudi Arabia for 2060, as well as combination of its Green Deal and the Circular Carbon Economy Framework, and then of course Bahrain. Oman also has really significant interest in this, but no net zero pledges, and Kuwait has also expressed interest. So across the region, we see this is becoming quite big. But what's also important to remember is that in all of even the strategies and the contributions that have been made to the UNFCCC in terms of what levels each country will meet to meet these net zero pledges, the emphasis is not to make hydrogen a new industry by itself, but really making part of the existing oil and gas strategy or industry that exists. And this will be really important for the MENA region particularly. So now I want to go into particular opportunities for the region. What I presented a little bit ago was really opportunities and challenges of hydrogen, irrespective of what industry or what country it will be in. But now it's really more specific for the MENA region and particularly opportunities in the Gulf. I will not really go over these very quickly. I will in detail. I will just list them for you a little bit, as I said, an overarching generic summary, and then we'll focus only on particular one. The first opportunity is the potential existing large size and of market that could be available for Gulf states. And Gulf states, as we've heard a little bit from Dr. Bassam, they really very well positioned I'll go back here, because of a great advantage in the oil and gas sector, then they are already very well positioned to have a significant comparative advantage over other countries in the production of blue hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen, because they can really use synergies as well as infrastructure, et cetera, in the oil and gas industry, and also have access to low-cost natural gas, especially if they're able to develop CCUS technology. So that really positions Gulf states in a really unique position as a part of a potential leader in the market. But when it comes to green, we also see similar potential for comparative advantage, because the region has some of the best wind and solar resources, and also had been shown to be able to produce some of the lowest renewable energy. And if you remember that brief slide I had on the cost structures, then this is where then the competitiveness could be also achieved in producing potentially low cost green hydrogen. And these are potential because at the moment, this comparative advantage has not been realized. So it is potential, but it sets region really in a particularly important place. This is probably very little competitive for the region, but there could be potential in the future of a nuclear hydrogen nexus, which I won't really discuss unless anybody has questions subsequently. And then the final opportunities, I think, is the fact that if there is technology and usage of the carbon that could be captured or used through the process of producing hydrogen, in this case, blue hydrogen, then there's also big opportunities for that in different industries, and also an opportunity for environmental advantages, because it basically enables the decarbonization of different industries. It reduces overall carbon in the region, which we know has a lot of environmental challenges itself. So then the combination of these really can present not just an environmental opportunity, but also a financial and economic and technological opportunity as well. Especially that the CCUS technology can be used across different industries. So what that means, and then the hydrogen itself can be also having really multiple uses, so to speak, in the different industries. Now, I just want to take you a little bit in detail on the very first opportunity which I highlighted for you, which is the potential existing market and opportunity. Now, it's important to note that there really we don't really know, and no one can really tell us or play God, so to speak, of telling of knowing what exactly the exact global demand for hydrogen will be globally. And there are various sources, whether it's IRENA or the IEA or the Hydrogen Council, or sometimes different countries that have their own hydrogen strategy. They all have different estimates of what the global demand will be. And it varies quite large, from anywhere from share of hydrogen reaching anywhere from 12% all the way to 22% global energy demand in 2050. So, and by 2030, it's expected that it might reach up to 15%. Of course, that number will vary depending on what investments will happen between now and 2030 to achieve that. When we think of the Gulf states, and what is this global market really going to mean for a country like Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or the region in general? I've done some work about last year, actually, and this was before the change of the price of with the energy crisis and the invasion of Russia of Ukraine. So this is from previous also estimates. But if we look anywhere, if we're expecting it to hydrogen to be anywhere from 13 to 27 of total energy demand, and I apologize, here it says 22, and I haven't updated the slide from the newest studies from IRENA, potentially mean anywhere of about 400 to 700 billion market globally of hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives and products. And derivatives like ammonia or other products that use hydrogen in it. Now, that could, according to my studies, estimate there could be a potential of anywhere 70 to 200 billion US dollars estimate of today's money for the Gulf region. So we're really talking really large opportunity. And then if you put this in the context of the economic diversification plans that we have, as well as the environmental targets, then that really represents a very fantastic opportunity that could achieve not only energy transition needs, but also economic diversification, and of course, therefore, economic sustainability and environmental sustainability. So that's really pretty much it for the opportunities. But finally, just to give you an idea, put here an example of hydrogen. So if we imagine that hydrogen will displace or replace 10% of global energy demand by 2040, estimates of what would be needed according to today in just the transportation sector is something the equivalent of not just one NEOM, but about 50 NEOM projects. So if you imagine the Saudi Arabia's flagship project of NEOM, the hydrogen that will be required will be 50 of that. So the opportunity is massive. And I think this is really the takeaway of the section. And if we look at where there are hydrogen projects globally, region really is behind most of the other projects in clean hydrogen exist in other parts of the world, but it's important that there are recognized that the region is catching up very quickly, or trying at least. Now let me take you through the challenges, and I don't want to present the challenges as a doom and gloom situation because there are quite a few, and as I mentioned, this will be from various studies. But the challenges, I think, are not necessarily to say that the targets will not be achievable or that the Gulf states, or in this case, for example, we're sitting in Saudi, or you are, will not be able to achieve these big targets or market shares that are potentially available. It just is the way of how can we not just achieve the targets, but also maximize the economic and environmental advantages of the hydrogen strategy and the hydrogen economy, so that it really maximizes not just the hydrogen economy, but also the overall energy market and energy economy for the states. So the first challenge is, despite that big demand size that I presented to you, at the moment, there really isn't or aren't fully developed markets for the demand and no confirmed uptakers. So what that means is then not only when we have projects planned, a big part, if there's no available uptakers, and that will delay the supply and the construction of many of the projects. And then there will be an important role for governments as well as the regulation to enhance the creation of demand, so that then incentivizes the creation of supply. And that will be also the role in supply, also the role of governments potentially in incentivizing that and making that a profitable position. And in terms of competitiveness, again, this is competitive pricing. We think that about at the moment for hydrogen to be competitive, it has to be competitive with hydrogen that is produced from fossil fuels, which has been very available and pretty much the majority of hydrogen used globally. But the price has been more or less been set to be $2 per kilogram of hydrogen for that to be competitive in the with gray hydrogen, or the quote unquote dirty hydrogen, in the absence of carbon taxes. Now that figure is important to remember, because that pricing potentially now, the cost of that has gone up with the increase of the natural gases and oil price globally. But despite the increase of the cost of traditional hydrogen or conventional hydrogen from conventional fossil fuels, hydrogen, both blue and green, remain higher cost. So the competitiveness of that has improved, but then really, unless hydrogen becomes really competitive, and it's going to become a problem to enable really the maximization and the realization of that hydrogen strategy and potential, and also meet net zero emissions. Now, the second target or challenge I feel particularly is in the region, and I've studied economic diversification plans in the region in detail. They don't really have an environmental focus in them. And this had started to change a little bit with the adoption of the net zero targets in some of the states. And this will be really important because, as I mentioned before, hydrogen will continue to be not only important for the power sector and relies on renewables, also it's going to have interactions with the oil and gas established sectors of these states. So the really maximizing the role of how the environmental focus then will be with the interactions of these industries could be a challenge if it's not well addressed. Third, a challenge, and this is particularly for green hydrogen, which is more being focused on the export market, is that, if you remember from the introduction, green hydrogen requires access to renewable energy, so that will be used in electrolysis. At the moment, the Gulf states, all actually Middle East and North Africa, oil exporting states are really behind their own targets in renewables. Across the region, with the exception of the UAE, renewables are still less than 1% or 2% of the overall energy capacity. Now, the targets of these states are not due today, they're due a little bit in the future. So there will be more an important part of catching up and expanding of the renewable energy as well. And this is important because if we compare renewable energy, electricity generated in oil or hydrocarbon importing economies, they are ahead of the oil exporting economies, and they also, some of them are starting hydrogen targets and hydrogen ambitions. So the competitiveness then will be, in green hydrogen, will be really linked to making sure there is enough renewable energy. The fourth challenge is really the fact that at the moment, technology, I mentioned earlier, technology is an important value driver, both for blue when it comes to CCUS, but also green for electrolyzers. But at the moment, really, there is constraints because of limited funding of on CCUS and technology in Gulf states historically, and now it's been increasing in some countries more than others. But then that's really going to be a challenge if it's not addressed, whether through additional funding or through partnering with technology leaders from outside the region. And just to give you an example, this is a targeted funded for at the moment between 2021 to 2030 for what kind of targeted support is required for hydrogen, particularly green. We see that most of it really is the highest is from funding from the European Union, but then most of the other states are mostly European, and we don't have a lot of funding in Gulf states. If we look at also hydrogen budgets spent on low carbon energy research and development, and this is maybe important for KAUST because you guys are a leader in the region as well in science and technology and R&D, we see that the region itself is coupled with the rest of the world and collectively has 1.3% of 1.3% of their GDP being spent on hydrogen. So we're looking at really very low compared to some of the other regions. So this is also going to be potentially a challenge in the future. The other challenge, I think, is the fact that hydrogen, to maximize the hydrogen economy, there's going to be a need to involve the private sector more than previously in oil in the energy sector. And in the region, energy sectors have been traditionally really nationalized, mostly from the state. So, but at the moment, I think there's a lot of inefficiencies within the private sector that exist. So there has to be maybe an improvement of the efficiency, market, and resilience of the private sector and the competitiveness of the private sector in the Gulf to enable them to really maximize their contribution in the hydrogen economy with the state in the future. The next challenge is the fact that low carbon hydrogen is going to be expensive. So then what do you do with the remaining carbon in a way that will make it commercially and economically profitable? And there are different usages of how that carbon could be used, whether it's through the CCUS framework, whether it's through the circular carbon economy framework, but that will be a challenge that we'll need to have solutions. And the solutions will be really important, again, in really driving economic profitability of hydrogen for the region. The next challenge is the weak regulatory environment when it comes to decarbonization. For example, CCUS regulation is really very weak across the Gulf states. There is also need for focusing on things like carbon certificates or maybe carbon trading, which is in development. For example, in Saudi. Water might be a challenge also for the future, particularly with green. And then finally, how do you make it affordable for consumers? Because if it's expensive, then you need to think of maybe subsidies or other ways to enhance the demand, as I was speaking earlier. And the last two challenges here are the finance structure. So the hydrogen economy is really going to require, as I mentioned, significant investment in technology, in infrastructure, and also requires maybe different solutions than what had been in the past through just really state or nationalized oil and gas companies. Now we're going to have to think of really what is the best finance structure for financing the industry and the supply side, but also potentially incentivizing demand and financing that for the industries that then will also use hydrogen. And this will be really important, particularly if we are targeting the use of hydrogen in local markets for local decarbonization, not only exports. And finally is the subsidies. So subsidies, one, we know that they're very pervasive in the Middle East region. And then two, we also know that they are a very important tool historically in also really having policies that incentivize both supply and demand side. And this is a graph that might look very technical, so you don't need to worry about it. I'll explain it very briefly. If the subsidies aren't well established, then subsidies by nature, they can be distortionary. So what that means is that they could reduce what is available of production, and they also reduce what can expand what would be used domestically, but reduce what could be available for the export market. So and then that will then also have implications on the fiscal and economic sustainability and profitability of hydrogen usage in the market. And that would really then, if we think about economic sustainability for the region, then for the countries, and ensuring that there is really maximizing socioeconomic development that's going to come out of these hydrogen projects, not just environmental benefits, then the role of subsidies will have to be determined really well and structured well so that the maximized benefits are achieved. And now this is really the kind of takeaways and summary before I conclude. The takeaway of the presentation is that the Gulf states and the MENA region in general are extremely well positioned to be leaders in hydrogen, clean hydrogen, but there's significant challenges that remain ahead, both in terms of partnerships, both in terms of regulatory and finance structures, and also availability of markets. And I think the focus for this to be really the key for success of the hydrogen economy in the region will be to ensure that short-term planning is done with long-term vision, and also to make a hydrogen strategy successful and viable at all different levels, but also make it part of the larger energy strategy, not a separate strategy for the countries. And of course, the role of standards and regulation will become really important at this stage. And at this stage, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'll pass back the floor to Dr. Bassam.
Thank you, Manal. Thank you for this insightful talk about the opportunity and the many challenges that you have identified. Please write your questions in the Q&A function in there, and we'll address them during the panel discussion. Our next speaker is Dr. Wael Al-Mazidi. He has over 25 years of industry experience in energy and infrastructure, acquired while working for the Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, the World Bank Group, BTU Venture, and FATE Consortium, which is a collaborative energy technology platform. Recently, he co-founded IONA, I think, or IONA, Arabia for Alternative Energy. It's an advisory firm, and also Advanced Labs, which is a global hydrogen accelerator, where he's also the CEO, among other roles he held in the region. He's a lead author of the Kuwait Hydrogen White Paper, Preliminary Hydrogen Strategy and Roadmap, and coordinating author for Roadmap for inclusive customer-facing hydrogen ecosystem to expedite the energy transition for the T20 Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 2020. More details about Dr. Wael's credentials are on the seminar webpage. But for now, please, Dr. Wael, the floor is yours.
I would like to thank Professor Bassam Dali, Professor Mohammed Saeed, and Professor William Roberts for inviting me to address the first edition of KAUST Clean Combustion Research Center's Hydrogen Seminar Series. I also would like to send my greetings to all the people joining us, the people who are in the audience. For this presentation, I will use the material that I had developed for a chapter on MENA hydrogen that I am contributing to the book. And the book is titled The Emerging Hydrogen for Saudi Arabia. I'm honored to have been invited by KAUST and KAPSARC to become a contributor to this forward-looking project. I think Bassam so far looking good. I will start by posing an existential question for the MENA region. Oh, I'm now having problems moving between. Yeah, here we are. Will the MENA energy suppliers of today be able to capture a meaningful share of the global energy market in 2050 as the energy transition compels countries, companies, and soon individuals around the world to reduce their carbon footprint to net zero by, say, 2050? I will try to address this question. So today we have a very rosy picture. Hydrogen investments provides MENA countries with a tangible opportunity to assume a proactive role in the ongoing energy transition. 5 MENA countries, named Egypt, Oman, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, reacted to the hydrogen opportunity and have become first movers. 47 renewable and low carbon hydrogen projects at a total estimated cost of more than $50 billion have been announced at the end of 2021. I am told the number of projects and capital investments has gone up since. Renewable hydrogen and ammonia projects accounted for 75% announced projects. Final investment decisions, or FIDs, for some projects are scheduled for as early as end of 2020, early 2023. Developer consortia for these projects are led by national oil companies, sovereign wealth funds, state-owned enterprises, private power developers, primarily from the first mover countries, in partnership with international project developers, original equipment manufacturers, fertilizer companies, major energy companies, industrial gases companies, energy traders, and utilities from Belgium, China, France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Norway, South Korea, the UK, and the USA. The holding of COP27 and COP28 in Egypt and the United Arab Emirates will certainly inject additional impetus to transform the announcement into concrete action. This is just giving an idea on a country by country, the competitive advantage of each country, the drivers for hydrogen. In the case of Morocco, hydrogen would provide Morocco with an opportunity to pivot from an importer of energy and ammonia into an exporter. So that is going to be a major step change for Morocco. And this gives you also an idea of all the private developer and companies that are engaged within the project scene in Morocco. The same is in Egypt. In fact, Egypt has been very, very busy getting started for COP27 with close to 11.62 gigawatts, a pipeline of renewable hydrogen and ammonia projects announced as of May 2022. And again, this gives you an idea of all the different power developers and project developers from all walks of industry that have been expressing interest and signing MOUs with Egypt. Oman, also one of the early movers. As you can see, they also are focused on the renewable side of, so it's primarily renewable electrolytic hydrogen, or what is called green hydrogen. And again, it gives you an idea of the competitive advantage of Oman in the hydrogen space and the strategy drivers for the country. Of course, Saudi Arabia is going to be one of the leaders, especially after the announcement by SABIC of the 11 or 12 million ton per year low carbon ammonia project together with SABIC. So I think, and of course, the NEOM project with Aqua Power and Air Products that is going to be probably still is the largest renewable hydrogen or ammonia project globally. United Arab Emirates, certainly one of the leaders, taking bold decisions on many, many fronts. And again, they were the first to announce a net emission reduction target for 2050 within the MENA region. And they also have been driven by so many bold decisions and initiatives to decarbonize the entire industrial infrastructure, refining infrastructure, and petrochemical infrastructure in parallel with creating a hydrogen export and local hydrogen use cases as well. And you can see here a mix of all these different companies from all around the world that are partnering with their counterparts in the United Arab Emirates. Question will always be, are challenges. So the MENA region's positioning as a low-cost hydrogen supplier at scale is by no means guaranteed. And even if it were the case, this alone will not be sufficient for MENA countries to command a sustainable competitive advantage in the emerging hydrogen value chain. In addition, MENA countries face numerous mindset, industry, regulatory, and institutional challenges to capitalize on this opportunity, especially that the window of opportunity is narrow for CCUS-enabled hydrogen, or what is called blue hydrogen, or what in my industry we call low-carbon hydrogen. And so we all know, but probably by 2050, the renewable electrolytic hydrogen or green hydrogen will probably become the default production pathway for hydrogen. We are not still there, but it would require some time, but we will eventually reach that stage. So what I will do, and Manal has addressed a couple of these challenges, I'm going to give them a bit more specificity. And I've chosen 3 challenges. There are many, but I've only chosen 3. The first one, which might come as a surprise to a lot of people here in the region, is that hydrogen is not the new oil. And there is a lot of confusion that the more the industry stakeholders in the region try to fashion hydrogen along the lines of oil and gas, the more they will become marginalized. And here are the reasons. Unlike oil and gas, hydrogen is a conversion and not an extraction business. Hydrogen can be produced anywhere in the world via electrolysis. So the competitive tension in hydrogen production is very, very different from oil and gas. Hydrogen cross-border trade is projected to account for no more than 25% of global demand. This compares with cross-border trade for crude oil being around 74%, for natural gas, 33%. So it's a much lower cross-border trade percentage of total demand, and that needs to be taken into consideration. Hydrogen supply chains may return some features of liquefied natural gas, but will eventually look very different with value created closer to the end-use customer. The hydrogen supply chain will also be linked more closely to electricity for 2 reasons. It complements electricity, or hydrogen complements electricity in the energy transition. Whatever electricity is unable to do, hydrogen is able to complement. And also electricity is an input to all hydrogen production pathways. The hydrogen value chain will also likely to be demand driven at the outset, with energy consumers well positioned to play an equal, if not greater, role than that of other industry stakeholders. That is not the case for oil and gas, and even not the case for electricity. In fact, the structure of the hydrogen supply chain will be from top to bottom. It is not going to be from left to right like oil and gas. It's not a supply push supply chain, it's a demand pull supply chain. And where energy use cases will send price and quality signals to producers who would need to adapt to evolving market requirements. Lastly, regulators in end-use markets will emphasize inclusiveness and equity across the value chain, which will prevent producers from retaining a disproportionate amount of the value. Therefore, competing on price will not be sufficient to command a competitive advantage across the supply chain, and MENA exporters would need to invest in supply chains and use cases in import markets. This slide here gives you how demand is going to be shaped by all the different enablers and all the different price signals that will come from many, many stakeholders on end use cases. The second challenge is that the size of the addressable hydrogen market that MENA exporters can supply is nowhere near the one that exists for them today in oil and gas. And I mean here on an energy content basis. So I developed a hydrogen export model for MENA, which will be released before the end of the year and will be included in the hydrogen chapter I referred to earlier. And according to the numbers that we had obtained, by 2030, I have identified around 20 to 25 million tons per year of renewable and low carbon hydrogen or ammonia that can be supplied by MENA exporters. It's not a large volume. By 2050, the number more than doubles to 52 to 58 million tons per year, depending on what assumptions one makes. On aggregate, MENA is well positioned to supply over 50% of all imports into Europe and East Asia, accounting for around 10% of global demand. Adjusting for capacity and energy conversion factors, hydrogen and ammonia exports in 2050 would require 90 million tons per year of natural gas reforming capacity and around 0.7 gigatons of carbon dioxide storage capacity. It would also require 280 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity being fed by at least 500 gigawatts of renewable electricity capacity. So I think there are significant resource constraints that these numbers are going to lead to that will affect the ability of MENA countries to scale up renewable hydrogen and ammonia production and increase the levelized cost of hydrogen. First, the renewable generation capacity required for electrolysis is a near 35-fold increase in MENA's current installed 9 hydro renewable capacity of 14 gigawatts in 2021. Except for Central America, renewable energy penetration in MENA is the lowest in the world, representing 4% of total installed capacity and less than 1.5% of global installed non-hydro renewable capacity. Second, renewable capacity would need to be dedicated exclusively to electrolysis and not diverted from the grid to satisfy additionality requirements that regulators in major demand centers may impose to ensure that energy supply chain is decarbonized in the most energy efficient manner. Third, and ironically, hydrogen producers may find themselves competing for low carbon electricity with electricity hungry crypto mining centers. MENA countries have recently been targeted by crypto mining companies as a potential source of low carbon electricity. And some of these countries, our countries, MENA countries, have already instituted favorable regulatory frameworks for virtual assets to attract crypto miners and trading platforms. Moreover, the crypto mining industry is under tremendous pressure over its growing energy consumption and is being compelled to reduce the carbon footprint of its operations. And I'm just going to share with you some levelized cost of energy for hydrogen from IRENA and S&P Platts Global. So IRENA, for example, based on the slide that you see in front of you, has downgraded MENA's role as a renewable energy supplier due primarily to water scarcity. The assumptions from S&P Platts Global are even more interesting. Of course, these numbers are the most recent for last month, but they also factor in the high natural gas prices that is brought by the Ukraine crisis. But as you can see, the competitive advantage of MENA is not that clear. So that's why I believe that competing on price will not be sufficient for MENA to create a sustainable competitive advantage in the supply chain. I'm just sharing with you here the hydrogen roadmap that we had developed for MENA. And you can see it starts with both the low carbon hydrogen and primarily the low hanging fruit, which is decarbonizing hydrogen production in refineries. This is a major, major opportunity that most of refiners in Europe and elsewhere are currently focused on and capitalizing on. Of course, the production of low carbon hydrogen, or what we call CCUS enabled hydrogen. Of course, the other option is also pyrolysis, which I will discuss very shortly, and renewable electrolytic hydrogen, what is called green hydrogen. And so I will focus now on the technology roadmap. And the technology roadmap, we have identified here about 6 technologies that the region, in our opinion, should be focused on to overcome some of these challenges, investing and developing hydrogen storage and transportation. So that includes liquid organic hydrogen, that includes ammonia, which already is commercial, but needs to be scaled up in a different manner, but also liquefied or liquid hydrogen. LNG, believe it or not, is a hydrogen carrier. And in jurisdictions where there is no CCUS capacity, like Japan and Korea, LNG is being looked upon as a source of hydrogen to be converted to hydrogen through pyrolysis. Methane pyrolysis is an area that I think we should be looking at here in the MENA region. So that's another area that we need to look at. And there is a project, actually, it's a waste to hydrogen project currently under development in Sharjah. And again, on the hydrogen storage and transportation, both Aramco and ADNOC have already demonstrated several projects. The other area is seawater electrolysis, because there will be a need to protect the ecosystems, the very fragile ecosystems in the Arabian Gulf and elsewhere in the Mediterranean. And we will be compelled to look at seawater electrolysis sooner rather than later. Syn fuels or synthesis fuels, and this is where P2X comes into play, is also going to be an area that we need to look at very carefully. Direct air capture, or DACS, it's really quite interesting. It's currently very expensive, as everybody knows, but prices are going to be coming down, and it is a very simple technology. And there is certifications that have been issued now to allow countries like Namibia, for example, which is positioning itself now to be an exporter of CO2 reduction emissions via DACS. And there is a project here in Oman by ClimateWorks. So we do have people in the region who are currently demonstrating some of these technologies. The other area that actually is a bit overlooked is that the water consumption for hydrogen production pathways are grossly underestimated. So I think a lot of work would need to be done to actually optimize the water consumption electrolysis, as well as in SMRs and ATRs. Hydrogen sulfide decomposition, there is a tremendous amount.
Dr. Wael, could you
yes.
please wrap it up?
Yes, there is a ultra sour offshore fields that could be actually dedicated for hydrogen production. I am finishing up now with what can we do? How do we overcome these challenges. There are many challenges. We need to invest across the hydrogen and CCUS supply chains, including in hubs, use cases, and applications being developed in European, Asian, and North American demand centers. We need to develop local ecosystems and industry clusters to lower the levelized cost of hydrogen and create applications in electricity, industry, and mobility. Provide subsidies and grants to projects and consumers to de-risk hydrogen productions, incentivize uptake and demand, enhance project bankability, and provision for subsidies in public budgets. Create overarching and enforceable regulations to govern the entire energy sector and create a level playing field between industry stakeholders. Engage with governments in major demand centers over regulation and certification. Incentivize industrial countries to channel a portion of their funds earmarked for export promotion towards local ecosystem development. Finance the demonstration of key enabling technologies like the one I've mentioned, strengthening the institutional capacity of the local private sectors, including SMEs, to enable it to assume a leading role in renewable hydrogen and CCUS project development. Leaving the door open for international developers, industrial gases companies, and oil field services companies to dominate the development of renewable hydrogen projects or provide CCUS-related services would prove detrimental to national and regional competitive. I will leave you with some good stories. There are a couple of private sector champions, and these are ACWA Power in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the largest power producers in the world. OCI, Egyptian company that is listed in the Netherlands with the subsidiary of Fertiglobe with ADNOC, and Gulf Cryo, which is a private company from Kuwait, which is the largest regional industrial gases company. This is examples of private champions that will provide role models for others. The other good piece of news is that renewable energy credits are already being issued across the region for renewable electricity projects in Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. And there are already examples, an application of these examples to meet the border adjustment mechanism that is going to be coming into law in Europe by 2024, 2025, with certain companies already reacting and taking preemptive measures. I will conclude. The Ukraine crisis notwithstanding, the energy transition is likely to resume, if not accelerate, after a temporary but unavoidable pause. During this pause, MENA exporters will be reaping substantial, previously unbudgeted windfall revenues created by high crude oil and LNG prices. These accumulated revenues will eliminate any doubt over MENA countries' capacity to fund their market entry strategy into the emerging hydrogen and derivatives market. They will also allow MENA national oil companies, sovereign wealth funds, and private developers to compete with the energy majors over the merger and acquisition opportunities that are likely to emerge in the hydrogen space to enable them to build new competencies and gain market access. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Wael, for this quite a broad and interesting insights, and many of it is thought stimulating. Last but not least, our third speaker is Dr. Zaid Al-Gharib. He's the General Manager of Hydrogen and Circular Carbon Economy at the Ministry of Energy, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Of course, Saudi Arabia is going to play a very key and important role in the hydrogen future of the Middle East. He's responsible for overseeing Kingdom's ambitious program to achieve net zero emission by the year 2060 through the adaptation of circular carbon economy framework. Previously, Dr. Al-Gharib was a head of reservoir management at Saudi Aramco, mandated the set of strategies and implement sustainable solutions for over 20 fields. Dr. Al-Gharib is the recipient of multiple awards, including MIT Energy Initiative, Dr. Mikyu Shoji for Innovation, SP Young Member Service Award, and Saudi Aramco Excellence Award. Dr. Zaid, the floor is yours, telling us more about Saudi Arabia plans for hydrogen.
Thank you very much, Professor Bassam. Let me just share my screen. Can you hear me well, and can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
I just appreciate if everybody puts his mic on mute so that we can make sure that we can have I would say clear discussions. So first of all, I'd like to thank the KAUST Clean Combustion Research Center for really inviting me to the inauguration of the hydrogen seminar. It is such a privilege to speak at KAUST, one of the finest institutes. KAUST has been a stakeholder, enabler, and a key partner toward the energy transition journey in the kingdom, as we are working together on many projects that will hopefully change the landscape, reduce the cost toward our transition journey and achieving our net zero ambition. Of course, since I'm speaking at university, I have to start with my normal or usual pitch, which is recruiting brilliant students. To the brilliant KAUST students, you're welcome to apply at the Ministry of Energy. We have a great program, the CCE National Program, with many opportunities. We promise you, if you join us, you will work hard. We'll make sure you work hard, but you will end the day with a smile on your face and so much pride. So we promise that. So allow me to start by sharing with you or recapping the Kingdom's announcement back in 2021, where the Kingdom announced its ambition to achieve net zero emission by 2060 through the adoption of the Circular Carbon Economy Framework. So let me just give you a brief overview of the Circular Carbon Economy Framework. So the Kingdom has been in the pioneer proposing the Circular Carbon Economy Framework back in 2020 during the Kingdom's leadership of the G20, where we're moving from what we call linear carbon economy to a circular carbon economy. Throughout the circular carbon economy, we're deploying what we call the 4R levers, where our aim is to reduce CO2 emission through energy efficiencies program, renewable energy, low carbon fuels, and certainly hydrogen. Also, we're working on introducing new applications to reuse and recycle our CO2, as well as, of course, removing the CO2 altogether through CCS projects, hubs, as well as direct air capture. So we believe that the Kingdom focuses more on the emissions, not the source of the energy. And this is basically the main driver for introducing the framework of the circular carbon economy. So when it comes to reducing the CO2, hydrogen will play a pivotal role into reducing our CO2 emissions. Here at the Kingdom, as I said, we're working on many initiatives. One of them is, of course, managing the hydrogen program for the Kingdom, as well as working on or establishing one of the biggest carbon capture and sequestration hub, which will be capturing and sequestering 44 million tons of CO2 by 2035. In addition to many projects that we're partnering, one interesting project is what we call the Cryogen Carbon Capture, where we're partnering with KAUST and the Saudi Electric Company to drive the cost of carbon capture at the power sector, which is one of the high cost sectors, so that we, by the time we start capturing CO2 from power plants, the cost will be further reduced. So focusing and zooming in into hydrogen, here we're showing the various forecasts for hydrogen. We can see that the forecast or the envelope of the forecast is very wide with many uncertainties. But looking at the average, we can see that by 2030, hydrogen demand would be around 60 million ton, and that could go up to 250 million ton by 2040. The major source of hydrogen utilization will be, of course, for industrial feedstock, transportation, industrial power and heat, as well as building heating. The Middle East, of course, is rich when it comes to natural resources. We are endowed with fossil fuel, oil and gas, renewable, as well as hydrogen, for many reasons. First is for our ability to leverage high-quality renewable energy resources for low-cost production, our ability to diversify energy and commodity exports to renewable, as well as our ability to attract investments. Many of the MENA region and Gulf regions enjoy a high credit rating, meaning that the cost of capital will be lower so that we can accomplish and undergo major project investments. The benefits, of course, to hydrogen to offtake countries, including decarbonization, ability of low-cost clean energy supply, as well as the potential to leverage established energy supply chain. The Middle East is already engaged in many giga projects when it comes to oil and gas, and that expertise could easily be migrated toward mega projects for hydrogen. We can see, for example, the NEOM project for hydrogen or clean hydrogen as one of the biggest projects in the world, and we're using our expertise that we developed through generations and decades of working on mega projects for oil and gas sector. So let me now zoom in to the kingdom. So the kingdom is well positioned to play a leading role and become a major exporter of clean hydrogen. This is due to the fact that the kingdom has many strategic advantages, making it the ideal exporter. The kingdom has a low levelized cost and ample solar or wind resource. We have large available land areas that are suitable for development of renewable projects, and of course, production of large hydrogen volume. We have available low-cost natural gas, as well as suitable geologic formation for carbon capture and sequestration. When it comes to the industrial and export infrastructure, the kingdom has existing infrastructure that could be globally used to export hydrogen. We are positioned at a strategic location with trade routes for energy products from the kingdom to Europe, as well as to Asian market. And of course, our ability to raise low-cost debt capital, given our high credit rating. So the kingdom has developed the national hydrogen strategy, focusing on production, export, and domestic use of clean hydrogen. For the use cases, we are focusing on heavy-duty vehicles, as well as light-duty vehicles, as well as refining, aviation, and marine fuels. The kingdom already announced its target of producing 4 million tons of clean hydrogen by 2030 as part of our Saudi Green Initiative. So zooming into the use cases for hydrogen, we see that most derivatives or use cases are expected to mature post 2030, and that continue to increase as we go through the 2040 horizon with the global clean hydrogen demand. For example, we can see commercial available use cases such as the use of hydrogen for trains and heavy duties, as well as we believe that hard-to-abate sectors such as aviation, marine, and buildings will be the last to deploy or utilize or benefit from clean hydrogen. So here we're showing what we call the trajectory of use cases. So here at the kingdom, we're focusing on the 2030 trajectory, as well as not losing sight of the post-2030 trajectory by piloting projects for aviation, for example, marine, as well as the iron and steel DRI. So we have already, as I said, entered the implementation phase, and we're focusing on 5 key priorities. First, we're engaging with the G2G, where we are working diligently to secure offtake agreements with companies as well as government. We're working to deploy mobility pilots here at the kingdom, and which we'll touch base and deep dive into next. We are working on our export infrastructure. As I said, we have already developed infrastructure, and we are expanding our infrastructure. We are working on with our international partners on certification, as well as we are not losing sight of enablers that we need to deploy to stimulate investments in the field of hydrogen. So zooming into use cases, the Ministry of Energy signed early this year, 8 memorandum of understanding on hydrogen mobility pilots, 7 of which are already in implementation phase, where we'll be deploying hydrogen-based cars, a train, as well as deploying the use of hydrogen for ground transportation or ground services such as forklifts and what have you. So this is just a glimpse of the pilot project that we have, and I'm mentioning here 3 pilot projects. The first pilot project with Prince Noor University, where we'll be assessing the utilization of hydrogen-based cars and buses. The second pilot is we'll be piloting around 8 buses for to be transporting passengers within Mecca region, as well as we're piloting with our partner Taqniya to develop around 150,000 liters per year of synthetic fuel that can be used for aviation. And as you know, aviation is one of the hard to abate sectors, as we understand that this sector will be mature post 2040, but we want to push the envelope of innovation there by stimulating investments into hard to abate sectors. One last effort, which is the certification. As you know, hydrogen is a new energy vector that needs to be certified. The Kingdom position is to focus on the emission, not the source of hydrogen. We believe that color coding hydrogen is an excellent marketing scheme, but it focuses on the source, but not on the emission itself. So it's color coded by the source of hydrogen, whether it is natural gas, renewable, or even nuclear. So we believe that these color codes should be focused more onto the emission, because emission is the most important, and emission is what is going to push us closer toward meeting our net zero ambition. So here at the Kingdom, we're working at the Ministry with our partners and stakeholders to certify hydrogen based on the emissions throughout the life cycle, rather than looking at only the source of the hydrogen. So with that, I conclude my presentation. I try to be brief, as I believe that 2-way communication is better than 1-way communication, and would be happy with my colleagues to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gharib, for staying on time. Indeed, interesting developments, and the Kingdom is taking the lead in lots of those. Okay, we have now 14 minutes for questions. Those online can submit them through the Q&A. Pleased to report that we have more than 350 people are watching online, which is great. And thanks for those who stayed here today. So I may take questions initially from the audience in here. Please put your hand up, and we have a microphone in here. Is there any question from the audience?
Thank you very much.
I don't think it's on. Just slide it up.
Okay. Alex, welcome. I have a question that we are considering Middle East region as a...
Nothing's working.
It's not working.
Just take the other one, please. Okay, that's better.
Alex, welcome. I have a question that we are considering Middle East region as a potential source of the hydrogen. However, have you considered to use the hydrogen inside of that region to make the products that might have higher added values, like plastics or other goods that could benefit better in a way of the exporting those to the worldwide? Because at this moment, hydrogen that's considered as an energy source. But at the same time, we have a carbon and also hydrogen, and all of the goods made of those two elements. And the carbon can be utilized also to make new goods by implementation of also green hydrogen. Have you made that study? Thank you.
So the question is, do we create? Is it better to create green products and export them than export the fuel itself. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Al-Gharib. I mean, you have been looking into this. Is there any intentions of creating green products using the hydrogen and even do something with the carbon instead of exporting fuels?
Yes, thank you very much, Alex, I believe, for this question. We looked at the supply chain the value chain of hydrogen. We believe that we may characterize hydrogen into two eras, the 2030 horizon and the 2040 horizon. We believe that at the 2030 horizon, most of the export will be in the molecular form. So many countries will be exporting hydrogen as a molecular form, whether ammonia or liquefied hydrogen. And the reason is because the applications or derivatives are not yet mature. We can see, for example, transportation being maybe the most mature. However, derivatives such as using hydrogen for steel DRI, for example, is not yet mature. However, for the 2040 horizon, we believe more and more derivatives will be feasible, and the equation will be shifting. So we'll be exporting low volumes of molecular hydrogen and more volumes of derivatives that based on hydrogen.
Other questions? Please.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the talks. In terms of infrastructure, I think this is the main point is to really have implemented if you want to use for transport, for instance. So how is the plan? Maybe you talk a little bit more in detail how fast you can go in create an infrastructure that could be used for transportation.
The question is about infrastructure, of course, and are we ready for all these millions of tons to be produced and shipped?
And to be used, if you want to use for buses and demonstration, that you said, taxis, and I think in one of the talks.
Yeah. So maybe we'll start with Dr. Al-Gharib, and then we'll go to Dr. Wael and Dr. Minal. Please, Dr. Al-Gharib, so the infrastructure.
Yes, so when it comes to infrastructure, there's, of course, a lot that needs to be done. Talking about export infrastructure, of course, ammonification will be the first, I would say, hydrogen carrier. So definitely we need to build on our capacities to ammonify hydrogen. And then maybe at later stage, we need to think about transporting hydrogen through other means such as pipelines. Here at the Kingdom, we signed a recent MOU with Greece so that we can transport, I would say, renewable energy and hydrogen from the Kingdom to Europe through Greece. When it comes to other infrastructure such as refueling station for mobility, I believe we have multiple options. We have, of course, mobile refueling station that could fill in the, I would say, the low demand that is immediately needed. But I believe moving forward, even permanent refueling station can be done within a few years. We now built a very good supply chain when it comes to hydrogen, because hydrogen really, or transporting hydrogen is not new. We have been transporting gray hydrogen for quite some time. So the transportation or inter-country transportation is very straightforward in my opinion. Thank you.
Dr. Wael? We can't hear you. Please unmute first.
Sorry about that. I agree with Zaid, but I will just add a couple of things, because you cannot, again, look at hydrogen in the same way you're looking at gasoline and even electric, maybe more like electric vehicles. But as you look at mobility applications, you would need to look at how the mobility sector is being disrupted. So mobility as a service is a business model that is currently getting traction. That is coupled with the autonomous vehicles, the change in car ownership perceptions, the ride hailing and the ride sharing. All this comes together that the concept of mobility is changing, and hydrogen is going to be one of the enablers. So again, it is always tricky to try to fit hydrogen. It's replacing gasoline or syngas. So that's really one of the other issues. But as Zaid had mentioned, in terms of cross-border trade, of course, ammonia is going probably to lead the way initially. But also, as you benchmark the levelized cost of transportation for liquid hydrogen as well as liquid organic hydrogen carriers, we will need to look at the economics and they will be competing. And what would be interesting is the end use, the use cases are probably going to influence a lot the type of transportation mechanism that you are going to be using.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Manal, does all companies have advantage because they have already infrastructure and trading routes as compared to those who, like Australia, for example, trying to produce green hydrogen, or Chile for that matter, and export it?
If I heard your question correctly, you say does oil and gas companies have an advantage in exporting hydrogen?
That's right, yeah.
Well, for low carbon hydrogen, absolutely, because the infrastructure is, of course, there. Now, the challenge would be in the problem with low carbon hydrogen is going to depend on the end market. So is it going to be certified enough by let's say it's exported to Europe. Is it going to be certified enough in Europe that the level of that is really low carbon enough, which would require significant infrastructure and technology investments in CCUS to make that low carbon hydrogen really low carbon enough that it would meet the requirements of the demand side. So I think there's also been a shift lately. For example, in Europe, for a long time, the focus was more on green hydrogen. Now, recently, we see not so much in Asia. In Asia, it's also more the competitive low carbon hydrogen. We see a slight shift in Europe, for example, particularly now with the post-Ukraine energy crisis, on focusing on maybe not just green, but really low carbon to meet decarbonizations. And this will be where the oil and gas majors then will have a great advantage because they don't need to necessarily fill the infrastructure, but also because the cost for hydrogen could be lower than the cost of producing green hydrogen. But that all then really rests on whether CCUS then will be available and viable financially. And then in the other bit of the competitiveness will be if you compare with places like Australia or Chile, not just the green, but also the transportability and the transport of the hydrogen, because in some instances you might not be able to use pipelines, for example, from some of the oil majors, depending on their location. So then these will become a little bit I guess, potential challenges in the competitiveness. But where the oil majors have an advantage is that they're more ready, able to produce the lower carbon hydrogen, but to really get it to really low carbon that would be in markets that really want focus on the decarbonization or the low carbon element with sufficient certification, et cetera, then the CCUS technology will have to be really critical. And also at the moment, the viability of that is not necessarily is not really viable, and the price of it will be really easy. So I think in markets like Asia, where the demand will be less for quote unquote clean hydrogen, but more or green or net zero hydrogen, then that might also be the major potential immediate market for the oil majors rather than places like Australia and Chile, as you mentioned.
Okay, thank you. So I'm combining two questions from online. These predictions that Dr. Wael put in about $3-4 a kilogram, and there's another question: why are we talking about kilogram? We never talk about kilogram of oil or of gas, and the implication that's hidden within that is the amount of energy or dollar per amount of energy per megajoule. So if we look at that, the picture is really grim in terms of comparison, even with a crisis in Europe. So my question to you, with all these predictions, how are we going to reach 50% by 2050, as Dr. Wael sort of optimistically have predicted, when sort of today it's at least 3-4 times more than the price of natural gas? And is the extinction, is the carbon tax an option to make hydrogen viable? Maybe I'll start with Dr. Wael and then go around.
Well, I didn't think that my well, first, they're not predictions. The numbers from S&P Platts Global, these are the actual assessments for last month. These are not predictions. This is the assessments based on the level. Of course, there is no hydrogen being produced, but this is the assessments on a location basis. These are not predictions. They're actual prices, assuming that there is a certain design basis for the hydrogen facility that is available. Now, I didn't think that my projections were actually optimistic. I thought that I was a pessimistic. So let's talk about the functional unit. So in the area that I'm in, the functional unit for hydrogen is actually not kilogram, it's megawatt hour. It's an energy vector, and megawatt hour is what we are using at the moment. However, in certain instances, the functional unit will change to kilogram if it's a feedstock. We are looking at this now from a certification perspective, whether the end use case will actually determine the functional unit of the hydrogen being produced or certified. So we haven't come up with a final decision. But on the carbon, you have come up with a very, very interesting question, and even Manal touched upon it. The problem with carbon, there is not a pricing mechanism. And we are at a fork in the road now. So you have carbon credits in general. You have a compliance market led by the ETS and the cap and trade markets in different jurisdictions. And the carbon prices there are between $60 to $80 per ton, as they've been trading in the last couple of weeks. You have the voluntary market, which is growing also, but the price there is below $10 per ton of CO2. And what is happening now with the international transfer mechanisms that we hope to be applied under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, what will happen is the voluntary market will be under a lot of pressure to coexist, because as you know, the Paris Agreement does not have a concept of avoidance, which means that carbon credits and offsets in generally are going to be undermined. So we will be moving into a scenario towards more of a compliance markets. And the problem here in the region is most of the carbon producers. So carbon is not a waste, it's an asset. And they have not figured out yet that in fact, it's a value added revenue stream, and it could be priced accordingly. So you can price a carbon that is being reduced by CCS EOR different from a carbon that's being produced by CCS mineralization or CCS permanent storage or DAC. So we need to reach a situation where especially national oil companies, hopefully with the help of the industrial gases companies, will be able to price the different carbon reduction mechanisms because of their CO2 streams. So, Zaid had mentioned about this major hub that is being established. That's the beginning. This hub will be the kickstart of these pricing mechanisms, and hopefully Saudi Arabia would lead it.
Yeah, maybe I could hear from Dr. Zaid. Are we worried about carbon tax at the gate if we exporting to other markets?
Well, I think the main advantage or the main, we understand that when it comes to hydrogen, the cost of hydrogen production is very high. But I believe this is also, I mean, the revenue or profits are majorly driven by what we call the green premium. So hydrogen now has a green premium, and that premium, it is the delta between, let's say, a green or blue hydrogen versus the gray hydrogen. And that's driven by countries' desire to decarbonize. So looking at hydrogen is not a straightforward, I would say, typical source of energy. We call it energy vector. That's right. It's a true, I would say, description. But I look at it also as amalgamation of resources together. So a country needs to, when it comes to blue hydrogen, a country needs to have natural gas. That's a natural resource. But also that country needs to have deep saline aquifers to store the CO2. So that's a resource. In the past, that was a $0 resource. Now it becomes more valuable resource, like reservoirs, like oil and gas reservoirs. Now it's as valuable as that. But also looking at green hydrogen, also the land itself. We know that yes, it's renewable, everything, but you need huge volume or area of land. Many countries do not have that ample land parcel to produce renewable and green hydrogen. So that's another valuable resource that we use for green hydrogen. Yes, water will be there as well, but the reason we have green premium, because now we are really combining a lot of resources together to produce this hydrogen, and that green premium will drive, I would say, the competitiveness of clean hydrogen production.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Zaid. I'll leave the last word to Dr. Manal. We're running out of time, so please.
Thank you very much. I'll just follow up on a couple of things. Just one thing about the question of why we use kilogram. I think, of course, it's important to compare different fuels based on the energy and the cost of per energy unit that is provided. But when you go buy something, really, we're purchased by volume. So just when in the market, we don't buy by energy source, but by volume. And that's why the conventional cost has been more looking at the kilogram. Although the other comparisons are, of course, really important for evaluating where hydrogen can replace other sources of fuel. But also taking that a bit further to the discussion of the taxes, also, and I alluded to this a little bit in my previous comment on the fact that there are in the demand in the markets that are demanding hydrogen, there are different markets. So the markets that are driven by, for example, in Europe, that are particularly have real specific decarbonization targets that they meet even if they're expensive, that's a different market dynamics and different demand structure than the markets, for example, in Asia, where they will also be looking at not just decarbonization factors, so how clean that hydrogen would be, but also the cost of it. So then the thing about carbon taxes is when oil price or fossil fuel prices are really low, then that makes the hydrogen, the conventional quote unquote non-clean or dirty hydrogen, more expensive. So then carbon taxes really at that point will really give the edge to more of a competitiveness between the clean hydrogen and non-clean hydrogen. When the cost of inputs and feedstock are higher, then the competitive structure differs. But where carbon taxes are also going to be important is that they basically, it's part of that regulation. That regulation is going to be really important to force not just suppliers, but really to force also the cost structure is going to be different. So then it's part of creating demand and also creating more competitiveness or leveling the field for competitiveness between green hydrogen and blue hydrogen, so that we can really look at just low carbon hydrogen rather than just the colors of it. So the carbon taxes are really important, not just for hydrogen, but for overall energy transition success in general, because otherwise we're really not going to be able to achieve net zero targets anyway. And on that, I'll pass the floor back to Dr. Bassam.
Well, thank you very much. Please join with me in thanking the speakers. We could have kept going for another hour, but unfortunately time has run out. So let me thank you again for all your efforts. Thank the audience here and also online, and remind you that in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have another one of those, looking at production technologies. We have 3 exciting speakers, and please do make an effort to come, register, and then come. So thank you all, and then goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.